I don't even remember what started the conversation, but it ended up with her issuing the challenge. Can I fill an entire album with layouts made only from scraps? As we begin on our next scraps only layout, this is dedicated to all of us who have the pile of scraps that looks like this. And you're going to see at the end of this video what we turned this pile of mess into. I'm going to start with just these two photos. Now they are 3.5-inch square. I'm going to put these photos onto a mat that will be 4 3/8 square. I'm going to make two mats that are 4 3/8 square. Now 4 3/8 does seem to be an unusual number, but it will work out in the end. There's one. And there's the second. Now, my photos already have a white mat around them that just needs some trimming. So I'm going to keep that and pretty much make this what I hope to be a 4-inch by 4-inch square. So a 4 by 4 square that I'm putting on the, there we go. So I'm putting my 4 by 4 square on my 4 3/8 square darker mat. So next I'm envisioning a journaling spot here and an embellishment cluster here. So I'm going to get something right here to be my journaling spot. In addition to the scraps, I now have a couple of variety mat cards. One spot will be for journaling, one spot will be for a base for an embellishment cluster. I'm going to trim them down to be 3 1/4 inches square. So they'll be smaller squares than these. I want to make this mat card 3 1/4 inch wide this way and 3 1/4 inches that way. I'm okay with the ends not having the decoration. The top and the bottom will. So I'm going to just slice off a piece here. Then I'm going to measure my 3 3/8 to get the paper like I want it in width. To get the height I want, I'm going to slice off somewhere around 3/8 of an inch at the top and the bottom. And that should make the number come out to be 3 1/4. So let's start with the easy cut. We're going to cut right here to the edge. And now I'm going to cut 3 1/4. That's what I want, 3 1/4. Now I have 3 1/4 by 4. So I want 3 1/4. I'm going to take this and take away 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to start at my 4 and I'm going to back away 1/8 and then 2/8 and then my 3/8, which basically brings this over to my 3 5/8. So this is now at about 3 5/8. And now I'm going to turn it around to where I want it, which is 3 1/4. And it's not quite centered, but it doesn't matter. On this card, I'm going to cut off my 3 1/4 here. And a little bit of this is still going to be remaining on the card, I will cover that up with an embellishment, but I want it to be 3¼ inches here. So I'm going to, it's measuring right now at 4½. I'm going to take off a little bit. So I took my pile of scraps and I used my 1-inch punch. I wish I had the old Creative Memories dark blue one, but this is what I have. 1 inches, and you can cut 1-inch squares. And I cut out 50 1-inch squares for this layout. I'll confess, I'm going to ink the edges because as I see, especially these lighter ones right here, they don't stand out well against the white background. So I'm going to ink the edges of all 50 of my squares and probably of these two pieces as well, my journaling spot and my base for my embellishment cluster. And then I'm going to start arranging my squares and my photos, my journaling spot and my embellishment cluster. So I have inked the edges using the Memento Rich Cocoa ink. And I use this finger dauber. This one I bought at a big box store. I've written to Creative Memories requesting that they include ink daubers as they are now providing ink and inking related products to the line. Now I could have rubbed the edge of my ink pad onto the edges of my papers, but repeatedly doing that wears down the ink pad. That's why another surface is preferred, like the sponge on this dauber. Now, this brand of dauber isn't my favorite. I used to have close to my heart daubers, which, in my opinion, were a higher quality, and they fit my finger much better. This one is very loose on the finger, so I have to hold it differently. You don't want to risk the sponge falling off your finger because then it could land on your paper and put ink stains where you don't want them. So I've inked all 50 of my 1-inch squares plus the spot for embellishments and my journaling spot. So I'm going to start with making sure I have plenty of repo adhesive. I'm going to put these things down using repo because I may have to do some tweaking. I have used some repo on my mat to make sure that my paper doesn't shift while I'm doing this process. A tool that is going to make this process so much easier is the new Creative Memories. They're calling it a zero centering ruler. I'm not sure of its exact name, but it is going to really speed up the process of putting the initial blocks down. Now on this layout, everything I'm doing is with squares, but that is not necessary. I have done this same type of layout with a few rectangles, particularly rectangular photos. And I still filled in the rest of the page with the squares. And so I'm about to put down my two photos and my two 3¼ by 3¼ inch squares. And so I'm going to use this ruler to help me get these, what I'm calling anchor pieces, in the right position so that I can then fill in all around them. Okay, so as we remember, this is 4�3/8 inch square. I want this lower corner to be on my page at the 5�3¼ inch spot. So I'm going to put my ruler at 5�3/4. So I also want the right side. I want this corner to be 5�3¼ inches down and 5�3¼ inches from the left. I want that's where I want my lower corner. at 5 3/4. I have the top of this ruler 5 3/4 inches from the top, so it's actually reading 7 3/4 up from the bottom. But from the top, it is 5 3/4 inches down. So, however you choose to measure, it is on the 7 3/4 inch line. On this side, it is on the 5 3/4 inch line. So on this side, it's down 5 3/4 inches. So now that I'm 5 3/4 inches from the top, I'm going to put the lower corner of my photo, the lower right corner, 5 3/4 inches over. So here's my little 5, and then I'm going over to the 3/4 inch line, which is like 1/4 of an inch from the middle, the 6 inch line also. And I'm going to put this photo right here at the 5 3/4 inch. I'm going to do essentially the same thing with the top left corner of this photo. I'm going to come down to the 5 3/4 inch line. And from the right hand side, I'm coming over 5 3/4 inches. I'm using repositionable just in case I get this wrong. And I'm putting this at the 5 3/4 inches down. And this upper left corner is at the 5 3/4 inches down. Now I have my photos, and they are the anchor of this layout. I've arranged my squares the way I wanted them to go, but some of my bigger pieces were not exactly where I thought they would go. So I want to talk about what I did that I could have done better. And I think the best thing for me to have done would have been to not put down any of these big blocks first. I should have started with my outer row of squares and then fill in inside with the larger pieces. So it turns out that this corner and this corner are 1.5 inches down and 1.5 inches over. So if I put this corner at 1.5 inches down and 1.5 over, and I do the same thing at this corner, 1.5 inches up and 1.5 inches over, these corners will start being placed in the correct space. The next thing I should do is not put these in until last, not adhere them, just kind of place them and let the squares fill in around. And once I've done that, then put these centered in the spaces that are open for them to go. So I'm happy with my arrangement. I am happy with how I managed the variety of squares that I have in different pattern papers without getting too many too close to each other. And I have 50 squares. At first I thought I had punched too many squares, but 50 is the exact number. And so piecing these together and getting them straight is a little tedious. So I'm going to do that off camera and then I'll come back. I successfully got all of those squares down. It was tedious, I'll admit that, but it was rewarding to see this finished product. Now, I used to make these grid style pages many years ago a lot. That's how I remembered those numbers and how I could size pretty much any size photo and then fill in the grid with the 1 inch squares. I even did some with, for instance, I would make this a 4 3/8 inch, just like this, by 1 inch strip to fill it in if I didn't want to be placing as many squares. Now, a page like this will hold 100 squares total, and I basically cut that in half with the bigger blocks that I put in here, and I only needed 50 squares. But I'm really thrilled at being able to use those 1 inch square pieces out of scraps. So if I can find more photos, I definitely want to do this again so I can use through those smaller scraps in my stash. If you have the patience for something like this is a way to bring down those scraps in your stash. I know some people who just collect their scraps, cut them into the 1 inch pieces as soon as they make the scrap, and then have a collection of 1 inch squares to apply to a project like this. And I must say, this new ruler, which is a zero centering ruler that fits right over your 13 by 13 inch mat, was very helpful in spacing and having straight lines. So I highly recommend this tool, and I'm so glad that I have it. I'll look for some embellishments and be back. And here is my layout. Everything's adhered down. I die cut some of the scrap paper and cut out the words special and menu. I used the 3-in-1 scallop square punch, and I adhered down all 50 of my squares. And I'm really pleased with this layout. It was a little bit of a learning curve. However, I'm ready to do it again. So if you would like to see this 1 inch square grid pattern again, please leave a comment below. I hope you enjoyed watching this video and found it informative. And I hope you'll watch another one. YouTube says that there's a video right here that you would enjoy.